All right. Yeah. So faith. I thought that I had made this clear. Faith clearly shouldn't be just belief, no matter what, right? It shouldn't just be immune to whether things make sense or not. Like presumably that's not what any sophisticated person means when they talk about religious faith. I guess any plausible theory which talks about God being a ground for ethics is going to say that God's commands flow necessarily from his nature in some way. So it isn't just arbitrary. It isn't just that God could just command you to do anything and you would have to do it. I mean, what you're asking in that situation is asking me what ethics would be like if the law of non-contradiction didn't hold. And like the answer is I don't know, but that's not even a meaningful question. Yeah, I guess people who believe in eternal punishment, like, yeah, I'm a Christian. I don't think that that's what the New Testament teaches. That's not relevant to the topic of this debate, so I won't address it. Atrocities. Oh, and I will say, Charles says, well, we rely on our moral intuitions, and that's true. But I mean, part of what I was saying was that belief in God gives us a lot more reason to think that our moral intuitions are trustworthy. So. In terms of, sorry. In terms of atrocities committed by communist regimes, it's true that you can't draw some sort of one-to-one correlation between like their naturalism and their committing atrocities, but like that's also not true with theism because there are lots of theists who don't commit atrocities. And when we think about this, I mean, would Stalin have murdered 12,000 Orthodox priests if he was an Orthodox Christian? Would the French revolutionaries have made punishing a priest be or made sheltering a priest punishable by death? Would North Korea's system be built upon the principle that man is the master of everything and decides everything? If the Khmer Rouge had thought, along with the Lutherans, that each person should be able to read the Bible for themselves, would they have murdered people for wearing glasses? I just don't know what to say about this. And I will point out, like, these are, you know, out there examples, right? And we all think, well, there's bad people. But like, this isn't, I mean, when you look at the new atheists, I mean, Richard Dawkins always talks about religion being a virus of the mind. He signed a petition. He took his name off it after a controversy, but he signed a petition saying that this was to make to the Prime Minister, in order to encourage free thinking, children should not be subjected to any regular religious teaching or be allowed to be defined as belonging to a particular religious group based on the views of their parents or guardians. He wanted to outlaw regular religious teaching to people under 16. Christopher Hitchens hates the Judeo legacy so much, the Judeo-Christian legacy so much, that he said in an interview that during the Roman suppression of the revolt in 70 AD, Christopher Hitchens, this is a man we brought to this campus, right, as a guest of honor, that there should have been a thorough Roman cleansing of all that and a Hellenization of the Jews. Daniel Dennett says at the end of Darwin's Dangerous Idea that we need to put religious people in cultural zoos. At the beginning of Breaking the Spell, he compares religion to a lancet fluke that invades its host's brain and causes it to commit suicide. Sam Harris, I got The End of Faith from the library to quote mine it, and like just every page is full of horrendous things. I hope to show that the very ideal of religious tolerance, born of the notion that every human being should be free to believe whatever he wants about God, is one of the principal forces driving us toward the abyss. He tells us that some propositions are so dangerous that it may even be ethical to kill people for believing them. He says this, and we watched Sam Harris talking in the Philosophy Club, right? He says this about fundamentalist Muslims, but he's also said that moderate religious belief is more dangerous. So, like, would Sam Harris kill me? Maybe if he could get away with it. I don't know. So, like dogmatism read off of your metaphysical interpretation of science is certainly at least as dangerous as religious dogmatism. These people, I don't think they would actually countenance violence, but the things that they're saying are, like, it's just a question of, like, filling in like, connecting the last dot. Like, what we're hearing from them is, I mean, in order to hear the religious equivalents of this, you would have to go to the most fringe, marginalized religious leaders, or else to the mullahs of Iran. I mean, it's the language of guillotines and gulags, and it's being tolerated by people who ought to know better.
Addressing the critique of the so-called new atheists, Dawkins, Harris, and the law, I actually agree completely with Dustin. The language that they often employ is not only contrary to their... yeah, their goal is to convince people of belief, just like anyone trying to make an argument is. Their language is unnecessarily combative and unnecessarily violent. And I don't believe, like Dustin obviously pointed out, that any of these individuals actually countenance violence against believers or would actually, oversee it. But yeah, the language of their writing often leads in that direction, and I condemn that as well. That said, I'm going to try to defend where it's coming from. Why the new atheists have found it necessary to use such combative language, and I think it comes back as Harris, the quote from Harris, that some beliefs are so dangerous. So some propositions are so dangerous that kill people that believe it. I think what Harris, in the context of what Harris is addressing, is that he's not. His concern more is with radical Islam and with the religious implications or the world implications for the growing support of radical Islam, and he's not really talking about religion in and of itself, but this particular form of religion, which he sees as such is violent by nature. So the only proper response would be the only response he sees. He sets a doomsday scenario where the only response to this violent opposition is violent opposition, because that's the language that they speak. And I disagree. I disagree that anyone should be advocating violence. But I don't know if this is kind of a surreptitious way of suggesting that there might be any credence to the argument that atheism or naturalistic philosophy predisposes individuals to advocate violence or advocate things where the ends justify the means. I hope that's not what you're saying. And I don't think that's the case here. I think the case... and I don't think it's exactly parallel. You're saying that it's parallel to this kind of dogmatism, and I don't know if I would characterize it as dogmatic in the same way that you say that the religious fringe, you'd have to go to the far extreme of religious fanaticism to find something comparable to what the new atheists are saying. I don't think that's an apt analogy, or it's analogous at all, because... I mean, you have people, and I mean, the fringe, the so-called extreme fringe, is kind of a relatively new phenomenon. The idea of the fringe being advocating violence, the fringe religion, that religion in and of itself, in its modern form, is peaceful, is about order, is kind of a new phenomenon. The history of large religious institutions, the monotheistic institutions in the West, is one of advocating violence on behalf of that cause. So, I mean, I would just say, in defense of my side, that if there is anyone on my side advocating violence, it's lamentable, but it pales in comparison to the history of violence and evil that has permeated on behalf of religious institutions and in the name of religion. And returning to a point, I think this ultimately stems from, and what separates these so-called calls to violence from atheists, from the previous calls to violence from religious believers or religious institution, is the notion that faith is a virtue in and of itself. And atheists don't have that notion. We don't have, we're not willing to die. Most people are not willing to die on behalf of disproving God's existence. No one's willing to strap on a bomb and blow themselves up. And I think that just shows something, and I believe I have to agree with Harris. This says something about the toxicity of the proposition that God exists. So.
Why don't we take a 2-minute break, stretch our legs.